Hello. How are you, everyone? Welcome to the stage. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome, everyone, to this specific edition of the Pacquiao Festival. So we have selected this theme, and you will see why we have selected this theme. Before we start, let me introduce myself for those who's never been connected to this conference. It's your first time with us. I come from the north, from Scandinavia, when I was born in Sweden, and I am a big kid. I love Legos, I love video games and all the geek stuff. But otherwise, I've been in the performance world since more than 14 years now, dedicated on first more on the services and delivering, and now more on building assets for the performance community. And I am currently working for Neotys as a technical evangelist or partner solution evangelist to build solutions for the community. All right, so enough of myself. Let's jump to the content. Just a small gentleman reminder, like I mentioned, it's not our first PAC. In total, it's we delivered 6 distinct events over the last 3 years, which is our 7th event. So we have 2 different events since the beginning. We have one which is physical and one which is more virtual. The physical was aimed to bring 12 to 14 experts in the room. Every expert, of course, will present a topic and to exchange and talk and discuss. So welcome to the virtual format. So who are the PAC members? In fact, anyone could be a PAC member. Anyone could be part of the community, exposed the theory, the share the knowledge, the experience that you may have gathered during your various projects. So the idea, we are looking for performance experts in performance, not only load testing, because performance is pretty large topic. So we, of course, because of our expertise and my main field of interests, we try to focus more on the performance testing and so on. But now I think the topic brings more things to be covered, and that's why this year in this virtual conference of the Pacquiao Festival, we're going to have a mix of pure load, validation, capacity planning, and of course tips for also coding perspective. So if you're an expert, if you're a commando, you like to do very complex and not traditional things on your project. If you have a scientist approach, if you like to influence the market, obviously you are more than welcome to be part of the PAC community to share your content with us. So we need you. Without experts, there won't be any conference. So first of all, I would like to thank every expert that has been involved in this PAC story. So there are a couple of speakers that are there since the beginning. So thanks to all of them for their support, because otherwise the PAC won't be possible without them. So in terms of changes, when we are dealing with projects, obviously we have a couple of challenges related to our delivery. It could be change of methodology. We are implementing we starting to move to the cloud, and we are changing our processes. We are doing a lot of DevOps, and we're pretty new onto this. So how can I deal with performance? I am one to do fully automated performance. So how can I implement this approach? How can I bring more value to my team by automating? So all those type of topics brings value for the community, because we all have those questions. So if you're dealing and you have thought about an awesome solution, definitely it's the right spot to share your knowledge. But also there are all the challenges. Challenges more related to technology that we're testing. So if I'm testing blockchain or I'm testing a IoT technology, and there's some interesting protocols, it could make sense as well to share your story as well to the community. So everything that involves new things or challenges or new architecture concepts are meaningful for us, for the community. So please come and share. All right, so that was more on explaining the overall concepts of the PAC. So now let's move on to the Pacquiao Festival. So why did we pick the Pacquiao Festival? Because first of all, we need a theme, and we thought that let's shift between the themes related to movies and stuff like this. So we wanted to have a theme related to something popular, well-known. And to do that, just after the PAX Santorini, we selected. We went to. I had the chance to be part of a few festivals, to listen to music, and we had this idea a few years back to basically create a rock concert. So we went to. We know that most of the rock stars of the industry are following pretty much the blockchain technology because they bring a lot of value for them. So we thought that why don't we go and meet them? Maybe they could also share their expertise about performance. So I'm going to show you just a small video to show you that we went and see those various rock stars, and you'll see it didn't work. So we had to find another approach. And we have split the conference into various areas. You'll see that we have 4 of our colleagues here. So those will represent different environments. So here is the stage, the map of the rock festival. As you can see here we have structured the festival with 5 various stages. Starting with we will start the conference with the Aussie rock stage. We will follow the day with the indie rock stage. We have 3 performance rock stars that will be there, and we will follow with the union stage, where we have pretty much a lot of artists from different areas of Europe, EMEA in fact, and then we will move on to the US continent, started with the Eastie Boys, and last with the grunge stage. So let's start now with the details. Like I said, we have 20 performance rock stars for 24 hours of conference. So without waiting anymore, let's jump into the main interests of our agenda, which is the Aussie rock stage. So welcome to the Aussie rock stage, everyone. It's just, you will see we have 2 great artists with us, and I'm going to present the agenda that we'll have in the next few hours. We'll start the conference with a legend of the performance rock. So it's Stephen Townshend. You will see he will. Next, we have another great expert, Arinder Sira, and he will talk about DynamoDB by the name. So it's you will see. I don't know if you have been using those technology, but the first singer, the first expert our conference, I'm referring to Stephen Townshend. So he's been one of the first. He's a speaker that has been almost at every of our PAC conference. So that's amazing. All right, so over to you, Stephen.
Okay, so the theme for 2021 for me, anyone who's been following my podcast or what I've been posting online, has been understanding the human beings who work in performance engineering. So right now, I am not as interested in tools and technologies as I am about the people who wield them. So when we share thoughts on performance engineering, we tend to focus on either the big wins that we have or new technology and tools, which is great. But I am really interested in the things that go wrong, the things that are really, really hard, or the times that we completely mess up. So to kick things off today, I am going to share 5 of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career and what those experiences have taught me. My first job was for a small testing consultancy in Wellington, New Zealand, and my role was a junior performance tester. This is back in 2008. I was hired by Stan Scapers, who is another PAC member, and he's speaking later in this event. He was my mentor at the time, and it was just the 2 of us in the performance testing team. The first time I missed a performance issue, which impacted production, happened a couple of months into the job. The application was a rich browser-based mapping tool. It let users all over the country pin events onto a map relating to road closures and events which might impact traffic. So when one user added an event to the map, all the other users online would have their maps automatically updated with that new event. The mechanism that did this was that the browser would poll the server asking for new events on a regular basis. The request sent during this polling contained a session token, which needed to be correlated. The weird thing was, I could see the session token, or a session token, in the server response, and I was easily able to extract it. But during my recording, the session token had a few extra characters at the end of the token, which I never saw. My tokens were always 3 characters too short. I couldn't see these characters in any of the server responses, and that's where I made my mistake. Because my scripts played back without error, I decided that those 3 characters, they didn't matter. So I went ahead. I ran all my performance tests. Performance looked fantastic. I delivered a report, and then I moved to the next project with a different client. A couple of weeks go by, and I get a call from my boss. They'd gone live with the application, but there appeared to be a memory leak. They were having to reboot the application twice a day in production just to keep it running. Over the phone, my face must have gone so unbelievably red, like a total tomato. My blood turned to ice. I was just so enormously embarrassed that this had happened. So I was pulled back to the client side to figure out what I'd missed. This time I was armed with Stain and support. The problem was that those 3 extra characters were a critical part of the session ID. Without them, I hadn't actually simulated all the users receiving update events. Stain discovered that there was some client-side JavaScript code which added a salt to the end of the session ID. Now, a salt is just a bit of random text which is generated and then added to the end of the token. Without adding the salt to the token, the session was never created and I didn't produce the issue. So we added some custom code to our load test script, ran it again, and added the salt as part of that. We reproduced the issue pretty much immediately. So what did I learn? I realized I didn't know very much and that my ignorance had the potential to cause catastrophic events. That's a pretty big thing to take on board a few months into your career. I also learned how stressful things can get as a performance tester when things don't go smoothly. On another note, I learned that if something doesn't add up, you can't just ignore it. I mean, it seems idiotic to me now that I saw these IDs not matching up, but I ignored it and just continued on. But I was only a couple of months into my career. I was only just grappling with the basics of load testing. So, yeah. The other thing I discovered is that it's very tricky using a protocol level load test to simulate the client-side activity, which is normally handled by the browser. And that's been a theme which has been consistent throughout my career. Fast forward 4 years into the future. I'm working for a different consultancy now, and I've moved to Auckland. I found myself on a major project for a big government agency, This time, the performance testing itself went pretty well. Didn't find any performance issues. Everything was running well in production. It's a good start. I was in a BAU regression cycle phase where I would rerun tests periodically for the client. One day, the client asked for my help. Many of the customers in their system had malformed addresses which didn't meet a new standard. So they'd built this button into the application. So you'd load a customer, click the button, and it would fix up the address, right? And that was their solution. And it worked. The problem was that there were tens of thousands of customers which needed this to be done to. So manually going through all of these was going to be costly and an absolutely mind-numbing task for frontline staff. They asked me if I could leverage the load test tool to help them. So to be clear, they wanted me to build a script in a load testing tool and run it in production to update real customer data. Now, I was experienced enough at this point to know that this was a terrible idea. Load testing tools aren't built for this purpose. They're not robust enough. There was way too much risk. However, despite me protesting vehemently, they pushed me to do it anyway. I ultimately agreed to do it, provided they would accept all responsibility and acknowledge that this was a bad idea, which they did. So I built the script, I copied an existing script and I adjusted it. It wasn't that difficult. I tested it out in a test environment quite a bit. It seemed to work really well. Then eventually, we ran it in production. It seemed to go pretty well. There were no errors, the addresses seemed to be updated. That is, until a couple of hours after I'd finished running the script, where frontline staff started complaining that every customer they searched for had a note attached to their customer profile which just had the word boom in it. You see, in that initial script which I duplicated to make this new script, I had some debugging and I was passing an extra form post parameter or something which would add a note with the word boom against each customer so that I knew the customer had been updated correctly. And I'd forgotten to remove that debugging. So I had just updated tens of thousands of customers in production with a note that said boom. So in the end, they had to roll back the database, lost half a day's worth of work, and went back to the drawing board and said, "Thank you, Stephen, but we're going to use a different approach, okay?" So what did I learn? I shouldn't have agreed in the first place. It was an inappropriate process, inappropriate tool for the job, way too much risk in production, right? I also learned that performance engineering requires you to be slow and methodical and careful at times. I've learned over the years that I'm actually not a very structured thinker. I'm primarily creative. I do things instinctively. So I've learned I have to build structure and process around myself to stop myself breaking everything I touch, right? Even still, human error is a real thing. It will hit you at some time or another. Around about the same time as the boom incident, I helped an online retailer in New Zealand performance test a brand new one-day deal website. It was good work. Not an overly complex application, but I learned a lot about workload modeling and predicting sales events, and now what I call reverse architecture, which is when you ask a bunch of questions, find out about a solution, and then draw a model of it. Often, no one's seen a model before like that. Partway through the engagement, my new mentor, Neil Davies, went overseas for a week or two of well-earned break holiday. Now, until this point, I'd relied on him to do the customer engagement side of the work. So he was the one worrying about the budget, updating the client on the budget, our progress, and any issues. While Neil was away, it was up to me to be the point of contact and provide updates to the customer. So I kept working away, building tests, running tests, resolving issues. We had some pretty tight time frames and budgets, so there was a bit of pressure, but it seemed to be going okay. Then time goes by without me even noticing. And suddenly I realize, we only have 1 day left of budget, but I'm nowhere near done with the work. I look back and realize that I haven't updated the client for over 2 weeks on how things are going or the budget. So now I'm in a really awkward position where I have to talk to the customer and ask for more money. And they have had no indication whatsoever that there's been any problem up to this point because I didn't communicate. So unfortunately for Neil, he's now come back by this time from holiday, and he has to come in and help me through this. We set up a session with the customer, with the project manager. We talk through the situation. We come to an agreement on additional effort. I felt pretty bad for creating a situation that someone else had to come and clean up. I felt like I should have known better. And I'll tell you what, I never made that mistake again. So what did I learn? I learned the importance of regular updates to the organizations or stakeholders or projects that you're working with. Don't let there be surprises. So from Neil, I picked up the concept of a project letter. And a project letter is a weekly update on the budget, on progress, and any issues or risks that have come up. In fact, when things get really hairy, I provide daily updates, like a shorter update, just to keep everyone in the loop of what's going on. For the duration of my time as a consultant, for over 10 years, I religiously produced project letters for every engagement I ever did from that point onwards. Now that I'm working internally in an organization, I still do something similar when I think it's appropriate. Keeping stakeholders in the loop and having transparency can only be a good thing. About a year later, sort of 5 years into my career, I did some work for another online retailer in New Zealand. Now, around the world, most people are familiar with Black Friday, right? It's the big day, all the big sales come, all the websites crash because of the unexpected workload. Now, in New Zealand, our equivalent sales event is Boxing Day, the 26th of December. So all over New Zealand, organizations, shops, retailers provide Boxing Day sales with great deals. Now, this particular retailer has experienced more than 3 times the load on Boxing Day on their website than any other day of the year. They'd also been stung in the past, on the previous Boxing Day, because they had not been prepared for the load that happened. They lost all the sales online for that day, and not to mention the long-term reputational damage to their brand. So they didn't want that to happen again, which is fair enough. My job was to performance test their website, model the expected workload on Boxing Day, and account for growth over the years. I also had to set up a reusable performance test and monitoring framework. All good stuff. Things went pretty well, right up until the moment I needed to run a test. I built the load test using JMeter. I think it was version 2.9 at the time, which was the latest at that time. The first time I tried to run a full load test to shake it out, the response times degraded rapidly as we applied more load quite near the start of the test. Now, the first thing that might come to mind, the obvious conclusion you might draw is, hey, the system can't handle the load. But there was an engineer on the retailer side who said from his perspective, things seem to be performing quite well. So I got hold of the web server access logs from the website. I parsed them and analyzed them in Tableau, as I do, as you probably heard me talk about before. And I could see that he was right. So in my JMeter results, I might see the response time was 40 seconds for a request, but that same request took less than a second from the perspective of the website. So the problem appeared to be the load generator or JMeter itself. So my next step was to start monitoring the load test infrastructure. At the server level, I didn't see any clear CPU, memory, disk, or network issues. So I was baffled. And once again, at this time, we were running out of budget and running out of time to get the testing done. Now, I was giving regular updates, so there was no surprises, but I was still panicking, and the client was still getting nervous because it was costing more and taking more time. So I got on some support from Neil, and we talked it through, but he was on another engagement, which was taking all of his attention. So he could not step in and save me this time. It was mostly up to me. Neil suggested I start monitoring JMeter's JVM instance, which I'd never done before. So now I'm treating JMeter like the system under test, right? I used a tool called Visual VM to show me how the JVM was performing. And the metric which showed me the first evidence of a problem was the JVM heap memory usage. For anyone who isn't familiar with Java and virtual machines, they have their own dedicated memory allocation, which is called the heap. You can think of a Java virtual machine just like it sounds, like a virtual machine or a mini computer running Java on top of your operating system with its own resource allocation and usage. As my load test progressed, the number of objects in memory increased, and the memory was not being garbage collected sustainably. So eventually, JMeter ran out of heap space and it died. This shark fin chart here is probably familiar to some of you. It's classically what you see when you're looking at heap memory and there's a memory leak within the JVM. So at this point, we've identified there looks like to be a memory leak in JMeter when I ran my test. It was great to know what the problem was, that it was within JMeter, but I still had no idea what specifically it was that was causing the problem. At this point, this is when I made my mistake. I stopped basing my actions on the evidence that was there and instead started trying random things to fix the problem. I tried dozens, if not hundreds of different things to resolve the issue. I started working hours at home every night, which I didn't tell the client about, didn't charge the client about, or tell my boss about. I was honestly falling apart, butting my head up against this impossible problem. As an example of one of the many things I tried, I figured in my head that it couldn't possibly be vanilla JMeter that's the problem. So I got rid of all the plugins that I was using and adjusted the test suite to work with just vanilla JMeter. I mean, there's some logic to that, kind of makes sense, but there was no evidence the plugins were the problem. And of course it wasn't the problem. The same issue happened under vanilla JMeter as well. This period of smashing my head up against a wall went on for maybe a week, which doesn't sound like long, but in a high-pressure engagement when everyone's breathing down your neck and there's budget and time implications, it feels like an absolute eternity. We'd already started getting extensions to the budget and to time. No matter what I tried, I just could not run a stable test. It was extraordinarily frustrating and demoralizing. Relief once again came in the form of Neil Davies, who taught me about Java thread dumps. So the plan was I would run a test, produce the issue, take a thread dump while the issue was happening, and hopefully we thought that might tell us something about what was going on. We figured it would give us an indication of the problem, and it did. We noticed that the majority of the objects in memory were stuck in a blocked state, and that most of these objects related to TCP connections. So we were now getting pretty close to understanding the problem. Somehow, JMeter was running out of network connections, which prevented my test from running. Still wasn't clear how we could resolve it, or exactly what the problem was, but we were pinpointing and getting closer to the problem. I actually can't remember the moment when I cracked it. Either we noticed that the blocked objects in the thread dump related to a particular implementation of HTTP in Java, or perhaps just knowing that it was to do with connections gave me a pair of fresh eyes when I was looking at my JMeter suite, and it got me thinking about different things I could try. Either way, the problem was that in JMeter at that time, you could pick the HTTP implementation for all of your HTTP request samplers from a drop-down menu. There were 3 options for the implementation: HTTP 3.1, HTTP 4.0, and Java. We thought at the time that best practice would be to use HTTP 4.0. So that's what I'd configured. Now, there must have been a defect relating to that specific implementation. because when I tried switching all my samplers to use HTTP 3.1, the issue instantly disappeared. I was able to run my tests. We proved that the site was ready for anything the New Zealand public could throw at it on Boxing Day. But we had gone a couple of weeks over schedule and over budget. So what did I learn? For one, shit happens. This was an extremely obscure issue which I was pretty unlucky to get hit with. It was also a very difficult issue to work through, especially given my lack of JVM Java analysis experience up to that point. I think we have to be prepared for that situation. You won't always know the answers, and you won't always have someone like Neil Davies who can come and support you. So in those moments, it's all about communicating clearly, being transparent about what's going on, asking for help when you need it. Still, my mistake here was really how long I tried doing random things to solve the problem rather than following the evidence. I see this time and time again in organizations. When a performance issue has been found and a team of people are assembled to investigate the issue, and then all hell breaks loose. People start making random changes all over the place without any data to suggest it will help. There are many people doing many things. It costs a huge amount. Now, that ends up, so what happens is it's not based on the evidence, doesn't get any closer to resolving the issue. Now, something I did learn a lot about in this particular case was about Java performance analysis. And many years later, I hit an even more obscure and difficult Java performance issue. Once again, thread dumps came to the rescue and allowed me to identify the problem. Also, every time I find a performance issue while I'm load testing now, I always question the tool, so my mind has forever been changed that way. My last mistake was very recently, and it doesn't relate to an engagement, but to a tool that I built. I had a vision of a central load test results repository shared by all of our teams, custom-built Tableau dashboard for analyzing the results. I wanted to both enable delivery teams to do more for themselves and leverage the power of Tableau for that deep data analysis. I also wanted to get the other performance engineers in my organization to store all their results in the same place in the same format. I wanted to let everyone leverage the power of raw data, which I'm still a big proponent of. The solution was a Node.js application that my colleagues and I wrote, which stored the data in a Postgres database. Users could either go to a web page and upload their results, or just automatically dump their results in a network share, and the tool would pick it up and process it. It didn't just store raw data, it also did some processing on top of it to calculate percentiles and other metrics for faster reporting later on. The Tableau workbook was where all the visualization and the magic happened. I published this workbook to Tableau server, which meant that people in the organization could connect and view it through their web browser, which sounds pretty cool, right? I called my masterpiece The Stash. It was pretty fun to make. I found it, and I still find it, super useful for my own work. But as a product for our organization, it has failed miserably. In its history, there might have been 2 other people who've used it. And they've just looked at that first dashboard that I created on the very first worksheet and ignored the other 39 or more worksheets which I've built, which I thought would be super useful and super helpful, and no one's ever used them. Now, I still think the basic concepts here are pretty good. Make load test results accessible and visible to all. Have a consistent place to store and this in a consistent format to store them in. Put tooling in place to enable delivery teams to get feedback on the performance of their systems faster and easier. But current solution, it's not working. So what was my mistake? I tried to do too much with one tool. Delivery teams need simple and easy to access feedback on performance. not an extremely complicated Tableau workbook which requires knowing Tableau to use properly. On the flip side, I like to analyze and interrogate data quite a deep level. But I can do that just as easily or more easily on my own laptop using the Tableau desktop app. So it was this awkward sort of compromise between what I needed and what everyone else needed, and no one was winning. There's no reason to force one tool or framework to meet everyone's need. The workbook was just way too slow. So my database had a lot of results. I stored all the raw data, so every single request or sample taken, or every test we ran over every application for 6 months. No matter what indexes I added and tuning I did to the workbook, it still took minutes to load some of the views. Now that's fine if I just want to do a one-off analysis into a particular issue, but it's not the customer experience I want to provide for my colleagues. The choice of Tableau was also a poor one in this case. It's a commercial tool, you need a license. Even if I want to share my Tableau server workbook, I need to get people to have an account and sort of sign up, and I'd have to approve it. That goes against my principle that performance data should be accessible and open to everyone without those kind of hoops to jump through. I'm reviewing the stash and what the next steps are. Maybe the next pack or the pack after, I'll be able to tell a good news story about something we've built which really does hit the mark. So what has this whole talk been about? What's going on? I think in terms of specific things that I've learned from these 5 issues, it's huge, right? Firstly, communicate frequently with stakeholders. Be transparent about how things are going. And in doing so, you'll avoid delivering nasty surprises. All we can do in our jobs is do our best. But if we don't communicate, that's the thing that's going to cause the problems. If something doesn't add up, don't brush it under the covers. Those tiny little technical details that you think, oh, that doesn't matter, they can often be the things which break you later on. Be aware of the complexity of the field that we work in. When you investigate issues, follow the evidence. If you don't have the evidence you need, go and find it. Don't flail around wildly like I did trying to solve problems. It's a waste of time and energy and causes a lot of discomfort. Be careful and methodical when you need to. If you're like me and you work quite intuitively, then you might need to build structures and processes around yourself to make sure that you don't miss things or break things. And shit happens. You will inevitably meet situations that you are not prepared for. You won't have the support you need. You can't prepare yourself for what you don't know is going to come, but you can prepare yourself to how you will respond in those moments. Making mistakes is important. If you spend your entire career playing it safe in order to not make mistakes, you are going to significantly hinder your growth. I'm a much better performance engineer because of the stuff-ups I've made along the way. Because in those moments, I learned so much, so quickly, in ways which completely shifted my perspective and the ways that I work. And it's not every day that that happens, right?
All right. That was awesome. And I think learning by mistake is also the best path to understand your mistakes and go and be better in the future. I think this is what this is what I try to do with my kids. Put your hands here. It's very hot, and then they will never do it again. But I had the same type of stories, but not the same, but the same situations. Especially the one with a lot of pressure. I really like those ones because it's you're open to learn, but not especially at that moment. But it's pretty funny.
I think that there's something about, especially consultants who work on lots of different clients and projects, they have this sort of battle-hardened war story thing where they've got scars from all these terrible, stressful events. But it makes you stronger in the end. But at the time, wow, it's difficult, right?
Yeah, completely. But the stash you said it was the platform you were referring to using Tableau. I really like the approach because it reminds me of other initiative that has been started in various context or customers. But how could you make it success? I mean, how could you make people using it more? Would you think that it's because of the current architecture of the product? How would you? I'm pretty much interested in this one because I think the idea was pretty good. The solution was good as well. You saw that there were some challenges, so I think you're gonna probably thinking of a new version. So, but how would you promote it or share it in a more efficient way so people can use it and adopt it?
Well, there's two features which come to mind. The first one is that most of the delivery teams who develop APIs in our company, they do a lot of performance testing, they don't use JMeter, they use Gatling. So I need to provide support for for Gatling results, right? That's the first one. But the biggest change by far that would make the biggest difference is get rid of Tableau. Just have, I would report just aggregated results, so just maybe trends of percentile response time, that basic stuff, not the raw data, and provide that in some sort of open source, open free tooling that anyone can access without having to log in. Just click a link. Here you go. You know, those two things would make the biggest difference. Yeah. I think the actual application itself is not too bad. It's the Tableau bit which really killed it.
So do you think that you can use like a time series database, like, I don't know, InfluxDB or other things like this to store your data and people can query? So rely on something where people can build their own charts. You can build your own stuff, predefined charts for the most common users, but leave the ability for more expert users to do the query, understand the model of your application so they can collect and build whatever they want.
Well, yeah, so if I build the really basic open source stuff for the delivery teams, then as it stands, then there's nothing stopping me and my colleagues having Tableau on our desktop and just connecting to the database. It's very easy. It's not a problem, right? And they'll have the skills to do that and to work with it. So I think maybe the problem was I bundled up two parts. It's the processing and storage of the results is one bit. How you connect to it and visualize it, that's a separate thing and almost. And one idea I have had is rather than people having to connect to the database, provide APIs which give you the metrics that you want to look at.
Yeah, so they can consume whatever you have, whatever data they have stored, they can consume it and do whatever you want. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, agree. Otherwise, yeah, I also the JMeter story with spending more time optimizing and tuning your load testing tools around. It reminds me of other stories, and I think by looking at the chats, other people were making some comments about that story. So I think it rings the bells to all of the people that are currently connected. So thanks to bring that up. That makes complete sense. I agree.
I did a rehearsal with my colleagues today, and they said they had the exact same issue with JMeter. So I think lots of people got affected by that one.